All right, let's jump right in. When I say ancient Egypt, what pops into your head? I'm guessing it's giant pyramids, right? Golden masks, powerful pharaohs, all that. It's an image we all know and love. But what if I told you that's just the trailer? That the real story is so much bigger, so much more complex, and honestly, way more interesting. Today, we're going way beyond the postcard to uncover the secret life of ancient Egypt.
Yep, these are the big three, the blockbusters of the ancient world. And for centuries, they've kind of defined how we see this civilization, as this isolated, mysterious place that was just obsessed with death and the afterlife.
But that's not even half of it. It's just scratching the surface. The real story is so much richer. It's a story about a civilization that was deeply plugged into the world around it, dealing with things like politics and power in ways that feel surprisingly modern.
Just look at this thing. It might not look like much, it's a clay tablet, but it's a huge piece of the puzzle. This is proof of some seriously sophisticated international politics. It shows us that Egypt wasn't sealed off from the world at all. It was a global superpower, right in the middle of a whole web of alliances and rivalries.
And then there's this, which is just incredible. A society that had a really forward-thinking view on women's rights. We're going to see how Egyptian women had a level of freedom, legally and economically, that was pretty much unheard of anywhere else in the ancient world. It's a real game changer.
In this image, well, it just ties it all together beautifully. What you're seeing here are foreign leaders. It's clear proof that Egypt was this cosmopolitan hub, a melting pot of different cultures, different goods, and different ideas from all over the ancient world. So come on, let's peel back the layers and really get to know this amazing civilization.
First things first, let's talk about those massive buildings. Yeah, we see tombs, but they were so much more than that. They were like a physical blueprint for eternity, built to keep the entire universe in balance.
So how'd they even get to that iconic pyramid shape? Well, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It all started with something called a mastaba, a simple flat-top tomb. Then this genius architect named Imhotep had a wild idea for his pharaoh Djoser. He thought, what if we just stack them? And boom! The stepped pyramid was born, the first huge stone building of its kind, a stairway to the heavens. After that, a pharaoh named Snufru got obsessed with perfecting it, trying different designs until his team finally nailed that smooth-sided perfect pyramid we all recognize. Every single step was a massive breakthrough.
Okay, so the pyramids were for the afterlife, but the temples? They were for the here and now, for the living and for the gods. I want you to think of a place like Karnak as a mix of like the Vatican, Wall Street, and NASA all rolled into one. It was a huge economic powerhouse, for sure, but its main job was cosmic. It was designed to be an engine that maintained Ma'at, this core belief in truth, balance, and order. And this wasn't just a nice idea. It was the force that kept chaos from taking over. The buildings themselves even reflected this. The columns looked like plants, the ceilings are painted with stars, the whole temple was a mini-universe.
And who is in charge of running this cosmic machine? The pharaoh. His #1 job, more important than anything else, was to be the main link between the gods and humanity. By building these incredible temples and performing rituals, he was the guy personally responsible for keeping that cosmic balance, making sure the Nile flooded, the crops grew, and Egypt thrived. No pressure, right?
So that's how they kept order on the inside. But what about their place in the wider world? This idea that Egypt was this totally isolated kingdom, it's a complete myth. In reality, Egypt was a huge player on the world stage, involved in some really high-stakes games of diplomacy, war, and peace. Now, Egypt's biggest rival at the time was the Hittite Empire. These two superpowers went head-to-head at the Battle of Kadesh. We're talking a massive, chaotic battle with thousands of chariots. Ramesses II, the pharaoh, went home and claimed it was this epic victory, but the truth is it was more of a messy draw. But what happened next, that's the really incredible part. After decades of being enemies, these two giants realized it was way better to be allies.
And this is the result, the Kadesh Treaty. It's the world's very first international peace treaty that we know of. They wrote it all down, made copies, and exchanged them. The only reason we can read the exact text today is because this clay version was found in the old Hittite capital.
And you've got to hear the language they used. It's not some cold, formal document. It's so personal. It says, "He is a brother to me, and I am a brother to him." This wasn't just them agreeing not to fight anymore. This was a pact of brotherhood, a promise to defend each other and keep the peace forever.
And get this single act of diplomacy from over 3,000 years ago was so groundbreaking that a huge copy of the treaty hangs on a wall at the United Nations headquarters right now. It's this constant reminder that the search for peace is as old as civilization itself.
And it wasn't just the Hittites, not by a long shot. This painting here shows just how connected Egypt was. You can see all these different groups bringing gifts. You've got Nubians from the south with gold and animals, Syrians with horses, people from a place called Punt with incense, and even people from Keftiu, who are probably the Minoans from Crete, bringing these amazing metal vases. Egypt really was the center of the world.
Okay, so we've seen Egypt's role in the world. Now let's zoom in a little bit. What was life actually like for the people living there? How did you run a society this huge and complicated, especially when you're missing something we use every single day, money?
Right. So for most of their history, they didn't have coins. What they had instead was this really clever barter system. Everything was valued against a standard weight, called a debin. So everything had a set price. A shirt might cost you 5 debin, a cow a lot more, 140 debin. But here's the cool part. Workers were paid in sacks of grain. Then they could just take that grain to the market and trade it for whatever they needed, based on these prices. It was an economy without cash, but not without value.
So what about keeping people in line? The justice system was pretty direct. Small crimes got you a fine or a beating. But if you committed a serious crime, like murder or the worst crime of all, robbing a tomb, the punishment was execution. But here's where it gets really fascinating. Sometimes, for tough cases, they'd use an oracle. The priests would carry out a statue of a god and ask it a yes or no question about the case. The statue would then somehow move to give a divine verdict. Wild, right?
All right, let's talk about something that just completely shatters the typical image of the ancient world. We usually think of these old societies as places where women had basically no rights. Well, Egypt was different. Radically different.
So let me just ask you, take a guess. What kind of rights do you think a woman living in Egypt 3,000 years ago actually had? Prepare to be impressed.
The answer is pretty mind-blowing. Legally, an Egyptian woman was considered her own person. She could own her own property, run her own business, and even go to court and represent herself. She could be the one to ask for a divorce, and if she did, she got to keep everything she owned before the marriage, plus she was entitled to a third of all the property they acquired together. I mean, these are rights that women in many other parts of the world wouldn't see for literally thousands of years.
So we've seen a much more complete picture of Egypt, right? A place of incredible innovation, a diplomatic powerhouse, a society with some amazingly progressive ideas. But the story doesn't just stop there. Egypt's influence didn't just vanish. It echoed down through the centuries, shaping culture after culture. Let's just follow the breadcrumbs through time. Go back to the 7th century BC. The kingdom of Kush to the south was so inspired by Egypt, they built hundreds of their own pyramids. Fast forward to the Roman Empire. The worship of the Egyptian goddess Isis became one of the most popular religions around, and Roman emperors loved Egyptian styles so much they dragged obelisks all the way to Rome. Jump to the 1800s and you get Egyptomania sweeping across Europe and America, with Egyptian-style buildings popping up everywhere. And that echo is still with us. That classic shape of the Washington Monument, that's a direct descendant of an ancient Egyptian obelisk.
So, the real takeaway here is that ancient Egypt isn't just ancient history locked away in a museum. It's a living legacy. It's woven into our art, our architecture, our whole story. Which leaves me with one last thought for you. The next time you're out in the world, just look around. How many echoes of ancient Egypt can you spot?